They'd been planning it for 2 whole weeks, but nobody thought to check the weather forecast. Nobody had an umbrella for Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, to stand under should a deluge appear. No one had a gazebo, a canopy, anything at all. No one thought to use the multi-million-pound studio they have indoors in Downing Street. They sent little Rishi out to stand in front of a very small podium with his head just peeking up above it like a cartoon mouse. And he was drenched because an absolutely biblical downpour began just before he came to the rostrum. It was a metaphor of sorts of how washed out, how rinsed after running the state for almost 15 years. The main party of British capitalism, the Conservatives, have become. And how shrunken, in that kind of reign, he's going to shrink still further. How shrunken a Prime Minister Britain now has. A shoeshine boy outside Paddington Station. That's what he looked like, unless Roland Rat is a better metaphor. To make matters worse, somebody was blaring music from the foot of Downing Street with a gigantic speaker, much bigger than the Prime Minister had. And what were they playing on the speaker? Things can only get better. Or, as I put it, things can only get wetter. It's the deluge, but après the deluge, we're not going to get anything that could pass for an improvement. Because at least dry, Keir Starmer dryly addressed the country in the minutes after the Prime Minister. And oh my God, I have no idea what he said, and I'm a candidate in the election. But I fell asleep during Keir Starmer's reply to the Prime Minister, though what he was replying to, nobody in the country knew, because it is literally the case that even the television journalists standing 10 feet away under their umbrellas from Rishi Sunak, nobody could hear the Prime Minister's speech at all. We'll have to wait for the written version. Now, we didn't get off to a very good start, me and little Rishi, as you possibly remember from the day after my by-election victory on the 29th of February. We didn't start off very well together. But I felt sorry for him today, to be honest. John Major, when he went on his soapbox tour in the election before the emergence of the Messiah, Tony Blair, in 1997, in the election before that, in 1993, John Major looked a hapless individual on his soapbox. But he got the biggest Tory vote ever recorded in the history of British politics. So maybe this feeling sorry for Rishi was part of the plan, although I doubt it. We'll see how he gets on. It is a donkey derby. It is a battle of the midgets. Little Rishi, Wooden Starmer, and somebody called Sir Edward Davy that no one would recognise in a lift. Even a political junkie wouldn't recognise. He's the leader of something called the Liberal Democrats, who are neither liberal nor democratic. That's the donkey derby. Those are the big three. And so, frankly, the only sensible conclusion that anyone could reach, especially in all the prevailing circumstances. Who's phoning me in the middle of my monologue on the mother of all talk shows? I'm sorry about that. The only sensible conclusion that anyone could reach would be to vote for none of the above. As it happens, the election's going to take place on the 4th of July, Independence Day. Let's declare independence on that day from the United States. They'll like that. They hate colonialism over there. Let's declare independence from Israel, because all three of those leaders that I have just mentioned are in the pockets of the Israel lobby. And the Israel lobby is in their inside pocket, somewhere close to their hearts. Independents are standing all over the country. One's even standing against Keir Starmer. Andrew Feinstein, who's Jewish, South African, a former ANC MP and a former advisor to Nelson Mandela. He sounds like a likelier lad to me than Sir Keir Starmer. Labour should have made him their leader. Jeremy Corbyn will be standing as an independent in the next door constituency in Islington North. Labour don't even have a candidate yet. Labour have been completely wrong-footed by this snap election that Rishi Sunak has called. More than 100 of their candidates are not yet selected, including the one against me. Perhaps they're not going to put one up. We'll see. He won't last long like the last one. He'll implode when secret recordings of what he's been saying in private emerge. But the truth is, neither of the above, none of the above, must be the default position of any sensible person in Britain. Whatever you do, don't vote for the genocide parties. And of the three genocide parties, the most reprehensible, the most completely, one might say, unequivocally, as Sir Keir Starmer once said, the most unequivocally pro-Israel party in the House of Commons is the Labour Party. So vote for anyone but Labour. Don't vote for any of the genocide parties. Vote for the Workers' Party of Britain, led by me, or vote for an independent in the places where they are standing and we are not, or vote anybody at all except the so-called Big Three. Now, in the United States, the election is also off and running. The weather's better, but the President, Joe Biden, is looking under the weather increasingly every day that I see him. And I note that they're pushing Kamala Harris more and more into the picture. Laughing gas Harris is at Joe's side everywhere. He'll be claiming it's his wife or his wife's sister, or he'll be mixed up, no doubt. But it's quite obvious that the Democrats know that Joe is fading fast, might not make it until November. And if he doesn't make it, it's laughing gas Kamala, who is the Democratic Party's nominee. Donald Trump, every time I see him, he's now in the dock. He's now in a court, being sued by hookers and comic singers of one kind or another. I've no doubt that it's lawfare. I've no doubt that it is the modern American equivalent of an assassination. No doubt at all about that. But what the impact of all that is going to be must still be questionable, because some of these court cases are bound to come to conclusions. Some of them are bound to lead to verdicts, and some of those verdicts are bound to be guilty, and then we're in entirely uncharted territory. There started off a number of alternatives to the big two. Robert Kennedy, on all kinds of issues, including the Ukraine issue, looked like they might be viable alternatives. I myself was inclined to give him my support, probably from an unduly, sympathetic standpoint. Maybe my long history, my Irish Catholic roots and so on, maybe I was just too sentimental about him. But it didn't last any longer than October the 7th, because Kennedy has now revealed that a worm entered his brain. Yeah. And I don't know what that worm was called, if he gave it a name. But since October 7th, he's been running with some of the rummest individuals in America. Rabbi Shmuley, I think he's called, whose daughter has a dildo business, a sex toy business. Rabbi Shmuley is forever posing with the artifacts from his daughter's shop when he's not posing with RFK. And RFK's statements about Palestine, Gaza, Israel have to be heard to be believed. It could be the worm. I'm hoping that I can blame the worm, but whatever it is, the reality is he has ruled himself out of any right-thinking person's electoral purview. And so we were left with the remaining candidates. Some of my supporters, some of my audience were all for the Reverend Cornel West, but I never was. I always saw him as a shaky vessel, his wife as an even shakier vessel. She was in social media today dancing on the grave of the president of Iran. Pretty dangerous thing to do, apart from anything else, and not exactly electorally useful to her husband, the presidential candidate. But is he the presidential candidate? Is he on the ballot? Where is he on the ballot? For which party is he now standing? I have consistently said, even before she entered the race, that Dr. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, was easily the most presidential of all of the candidates, including the mainstream candidates, and streets ahead of any of the independent candidates. I know her. I've talked with her. I've interviewed her, and you're going to see her on the Mother of All Talk shows tonight. I think that the progress that she is making seems to indicate that she's going to make a far bigger dent in this presidential election than she did when she stood before, and a far bigger one than anyone at first anticipated. So stay with the show for Dr. Jill Stein, the Green Party presidential candidate in the presidential election in the United States of America in 2024. Let me move on to the situation in Gaza. It has not improved. Yesterday, more than 100 people were killed, including an unborn child that was literally blown out of the womb of its mother, who was torn to pieces by a shell. I saw an old lady lying dead, bleeding on the street of Gaza earlier today, along with her daughter. Both of them were sniped by Israeli occupation force snipers for no reason other than that they could kill them. The bombing continues. The shelling continues. The starvation continues. The disease continues to sweep through a population of 2.3 million people trapped in an open-air concentration camp upon whom the guards have set, with all weaponry at their disposal, all weaponry supplied by us. But finally, the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court could take no more and announced arrest warrants for Netanyahu and for his defense minister. The sensation that that represented should not be underestimated, even if your local mainstream media have done their best to make it hardly a news story at all. I'm sitting here in the British Parliament. I can tell you that it exploded like a small nuclear device amongst the political class. It meant that all these people who'd rushed over to shake the hands of Netanyahu are now faced with looking at their picture forevermore as their picture with the accused war criminal, a man accused of crimes against humanity. Now, that's not a good look in politics. There is no universe in which that's a good look. Having a warrant for your arrest from the International Criminal Court means that there are many places that you simply cannot go because the country would have to arrest you. And many, including many big friends of Netanyahu to date, have made it clear that if he comes, they will have to arrest him. France, for example, which has been a slavish supporter of Netanyahu, have said that the ICC arrest warrants, if issued, will be acted upon. And many other countries, even Germany, the most slavish of the supporters of Israel, have made it clear that, yes, of course, should they come here, they will have to be arrested. This is very significant because it raises the question of whether it is lawful to continue to sell arms to a country whose prime minister is a wanted man who has an arrest warrant for war crimes and crimes against humanity hanging over his head. You might well say, how could that possibly be lawful? And I think you'd be right. And it has plunged Israel's allies, like Britain, into a very foolish set of circumstances. The British and the Americans, though nobody else of note so far, have attacked the ICC, attacked the idea of arrest warrants, and thus placed themselves, in my view, I'm no lawyer, but in my view, placed themselves in contempt of the International Criminal Court, of which they were original members, founder members, signatories, obliged to respect that court and to act on any arrest warrant that it issues. So this new situation will, of course, inform the entirety of this general election just called in Britain. It will increasingly, in my view, infuse the American presidential election to the benefit of Jill Stein, to the disbenefit of Joe Biden, and it will actually be historic. Israel, a country which claims to speak for the people who suffered a Holocaust, now has a leadership themselves accused by the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice of being involved in war crimes and crimes against humanity, including the possibility of the crime of genocide. Now, they say history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Well, my goodness, that is quite a rhyme. Finally, the chief martial law administrator of what used to be the Ukraine is now exactly that. You may no longer call him President Zelensky because he is not President Zelensky. He's no right to use that term. He has finished his presidential term and has forbidden the Ukrainian people from having a choice in his replacement. The reason for that is obvious. If Zelensky stood for election as president, he would be resoundingly booted out. And that would send the message to all the mugs around the world whose tax money is filling his pockets, his cocaine tray, and his property portfolio that you have been had. Well, Dr. Jill Stein's coming up right now. Stay tuned.